want to thank the Wilsons. What a special day to be able to be here with a family and the Nichols family joining them. Thank you so much. It was beautiful. And I want to thank, there are a number of you out there that have been praying for me, knowing that I've been preparing for this day. We've been praying that the Holy Spirit would actually be able to help me lay myself aside and be able to use me today. So thank you for those of you that have been praying for me. The evening chill was settling in as I followed him along with the others down the stairs and into the night. One of us had already left on a mission, something to do with money, we figured. He was the treasurer. As we walked into the night, we were singing a hymn. It had been an emotional evening. The Lord had washed our feet just like a common slave. And then he told us we ought to wash each other's feet in the future. Then he took the unleavened bread and tore it and passed it to us, saying this was his body broken for us. He passed the cup. The smell of the blood of the grape lingers still, a strong memory. Its sweet, fruity odor, a memory of the Master. Even now, years later, that memory springs to life immediately when I smell it. We walked the dark, familiar streets toward the garden, and Jesus told us that he needed to have us connected with him. He said we needed it as much as the grape branch needs the vine. And then he prayed. He prayed for the 12 of us, and then he prayed for those of you who would believe in him because of our message. He prayed that we would all be one, like his Father was one with him. Completely one was the word he used. That was his dying prayer, completely one. As you read through the Bible, that message is the strong theme you will find throughout, that we be one. This is the good news. It's the gospel. The text for this morning is Numbers 15. I'll read selections from the chapter. It's a text rich with the deep stirrings of the gospel. The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "Speak to the Israelites and say to them, when you come into the land you are to inhabit, which I am giving you, and you make an offering by fire to the Lord from the herd or from the flock, whether a burnt offering or a sacrifice, to fulfill a vow or as a free will offering, or at your appointed festivals, to make a pleasing odor for the Lord, then whoever presents such an offering to the Lord shall present also a grain offering, 1/10 of an ephah of choice flour, mixed with 1/4 of a hin of oil. Moreover, you shall offer 1/4 of a hin of wine as a drink offering, with the burnt offering or the sacrifice for each lamb." The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "Speak to the Israelites and say to them, after you come into the land to which I am bringing you, whenever you eat of the bread of the land, you shall present a donation to the Lord. From your first batch of dough, you shall present a loaf as a donation. But if you unintentionally fail to observe all these commandments that the Lord has spoken to Moses, then the whole congregation shall offer one young bull for a burnt offering, a pleasing odor to the Lord, together with its grain offering and its drink offering. All the congregation of the Israelites shall be forgiven, as well as the aliens residing among them. But whoever acts high-handedly, whether a native or an alien, affronts the Lord and shall be cut off from among the people, because of having despised the word of the Lord and broken his commandment. Such a person shall be utterly cut off and bear the guilt. When the Israelites were in the wilderness, they found a man gathering sticks on the Sabbath day. Those who found him gathering sticks brought him to Moses, Aaron, and the whole congregation. They put him in custody because it was not clear what should be done to him. Then the Lord said to Moses, "The man shall be put to death. All the congregation shall stone him outside the camp." The whole congregation brought him outside the camp and stoned him to death, just as the Lord had commanded Moses. The Lord said to Moses, "Speak to the Israelites and tell them to make fringes on the corners of their garments throughout their generations, and to put a blue cord on the fringe at each corner. You have the fringe so that when you see it, you will remember all the commandments of the Lord and do them, and not follow the lust of your own heart and your own eyes. So you shall remember and do all my commandments, and you shall be holy to your God. I am the Lord your God who brought you out of Egypt to be your God. I am the Lord your God." These are the words of the Lord. And yes, I will say it again, this chapter has the deep stirrings of the gospel in it. The gospel, you might say? Gospel means good news. How is this good news? Killing animals and measuring out grain and oil and wine for a pleasing odor, and then capital punishment for picking up sticks on the Sabbath? How is that good news? As we study Numbers 15, remember the scene I shared with you of Christ's walk with his disciples to the Gethsemane and his prayer for us to be one. I'd also like to remind you of another Bible story. Remember how in Eden the serpent tempted Eve and Adam to break away from the unity they had with God in 3 steps. First, he led them to mistrust God's love. Second, to disbelieve his word. And third, to reject his authority. They mistrusted God's love when they asked, "Does he really love us if he tells us not to eat this really good-looking fruit?" They misbelieved his word when they asked, "Will I really die like he said I would if I eat this fruit?" And of course, they rejected his authority when they went ahead and ate the fruit despite his command. By disobeying him, the intimate unity they had with their holy God was broken. And when God came in the cool of the evening, they ran and hid. Notice, God came, they ran. The rest of the Bible is the story of God's efforts to restore that unity. He longs for you to be one with him. He longs for me to be one with you. All through the Bible, this is the theme: God reaching out to us, God stretching a ladder down to us, God appearing in a cloud of fire by night and a pillar of shade by day, God speaking the 10 Commandments from the mountain of flame, God reaching out to his people through the prophet Elijah on Mount Carmel, saying, "Come to me," God coming as Jesus in a manger, showing he was love. And the amazing thing is, through all the generations, God has spoken whatever language, symbolic or otherwise, to let us know, to help us understand that he's pursuing us and wants us to accept his overtures toward us. He wants us to remember him. He knows we are very forgetful and sets up many ways to remind us of his desire to be united with us again. Notice that at times God in human history has worked to restore us by reversing those 3 steps that Eve and Adam took. Sometimes we need to accept his holy authority, and he thunders from Mount Sinai. Sometimes we need to learn to believe his word, and he sends a prophet whose prophecy comes true. Sometimes we need to understand his deep love for us, and he sends his Son to suffer with us and lift us up. So how is Numbers 15 a call to unity with God? How is it the good news? Well, how do you become one with someone? How do you build a relationship? One way is to demonstrate you haven't forgotten them. Let me tell you a story. When I was in medical school, I used to ride my bicycle to school. I had noticed a tall, thoughtful, beautiful girl that I wanted very much to know I hadn't forgotten her. Turns out my bike route went right by her house. I was living with my parents at the time, and my mother grew wild violets around the house. They had a clean, simple, wonderful smell. And many mornings I would pick a few of those violets and a leaf for accent. I'd put them in my pocket and I would bicycle to school. And as I went by this girl's house, I would clip them under the windshield wiper of her car. Now these gifts, of course, very simple, but it said three things. It said, I remember you. It said, I'm thinking of you. And it said, I love you. Is it any wonder that those violets turned up in Kathy's Vale when we got married? And through the years, they've been a sweet memory to me as well. And every once in a while, even now, when they're in season, those violets find their way under Kathy's windshield wiper. Let's look at Numbers 15, verse 1 in more detail. Notice first that God talks to Moses as if coming into the land of promise is an accomplished fact. When you come, notice he says when, not if. When you come into the land you are to inherit, which I am giving you, see God tell them of his love for them. He tells them of the gift he's giving them, this land flowing with milk and honey. So much more than my little violets. He's reminding them of how he is taking them from slavery in Egypt and bringing them to the promised land. He's also reminding them that when he says something, it's as good as done. They can trust his love. They can believe his word. Numbers 15 also is a powerful illustration of how God is unapproachable and his holiness is very, very awesome. Were they willing to accept this authority? Were they ready to obey him? Much of this chapter has to do with making offerings, gifts to God, something like Greg was mentioning and Thad in his children's story, how gifts are so important to God. God is working through these to restore humans to himself. He invites us to give these gifts. Can we give God violets? Gifts help remind of love. Love is what establishes the relationship. Have you noticed how many times chapter 15 mentions a pleasing odor for the Lord? 7 times it's mentioned. What is this all about? A few weeks ago, Grace and Isaac Kim gave Kathy and me a paper white narcissus bulb with buds that were just about ready to open. In fact, the next day they did open and released this wonderful fragrance that to me is heavenly. Now, narcissus brings me such great delight because when I smell them, I am transported to my childhood. I am, in my mind's eye, sitting at the kitchen table watching my mother, who has just picked a narcissus flower, and putting it between 2 pieces of tissue and then putting it in a big book to press it. All the while, this flower is letting off this wonderful smell. And then a couple of days later, she lets me open the book again, and here is this flower, nicely pressed. She puts the flower in a letter that she sends to her mother on the East Coast. So ever since then, the narcissus to me brings back these memories of my mother's love for my grandmother and her love for me. Are there odors that bring back vivid memories for you? Odor-evoked memory is sometimes called the Proust phenomenon after Marcel Proust, a French novelist. He tells a graphic anecdote where he took a bite of a Madeleine biscuit dipped first in linden tea, And this suddenly transported him. The smell took him to his childhood and a long-forgotten memory of his aunt who used to, on the Sunday mornings, feed him Madeleine biscuits that she had first dipped in her tea. The strong connection of smell with memories and emotions has been studied for years. Quite a bit is known about the pathways in the brain. First, you need to know that the amygdala and the hippocampus are the parts of the brain involved with memory and emotions. Now, what's unique about the sense of smell is as the signal comes down the olfactory tract, they go directly to the amygdala and the hippocampus, rather than having to go through the thalamus like other senses, the sense of sight and touch. So, more than any other sense, smell provokes a rather dramatic memory that is often associated with emotions. And interestingly, these emotions tend to be more positive than negative. When God told the Israelites that the offerings they were giving him were a pleasing odor to him, he was referring to the strong connection between memory and smell. He was telling them that he remembered them. In the smell of the sacrifices, he was also giving them an odor that would remind them of him. It's similar to the memories that one might have when they smell grape juice if they've experienced the Lord's Supper. God uses these memories to help us remember. He longs for us to remember him. Remembering with thanksgiving is worship. So now a quick review so far. Jesus, in his dying prayer, asked his Father that we humans be made one with him and one with each other. He created us with that unity, but the devil led Adam and Eve away from that union through mistrusting God's love, disbelieving his word, and rejecting his authority. Numbers 15 is an example of how God works with his people to help them remember him. He gives them gifts and asks them to give him gifts as well. He uses the sense of smell to prompt this memory. He speaks their language using animal sacrifices, a practice that was common in their day, a language that they understood. Now, moving on in Numbers 15, we see that God makes provision for forgiveness if they unintentionally neglected one of the many laws that Moses gave them. That's good news indeed. This willingness to forgive reminds me of how God describes himself. Remember what he said when he showed himself to Moses. He said, "He is a God, merciful and gracious, slow to anger, and abounding in steadfast love and faithfulness, keeping steadfast love for the 1,000th generation, forgiving iniquity and transgression and sin." But he goes on from there. He says, "Yet by no means clearing the guilty, but visiting the iniquity of the parents upon the children and the children's children to the 3rd and 4th generation." Ouch. I've always loved to read the first part of that text, a God merciful and gracious, but struggled with the second part, visiting the iniquity on the children's children. It's the same hesitation I have when I read about the man picking up sticks that was stoned to death. These parts seem so unlike Jesus, who said of himself, "If you've seen me, you've seen the Father." One thing we can certainly learn from this is how God is holy and disobeying him has dire consequences. How can we reconcile the two pictures of God? How is this part of the gospel? In trying to explain this to myself, I've usually hidden behind Deuteronomy 29:29 that says, "The secret things belong to the Lord our God, but the things revealed belong to us and to our children forever." And there is a certain sense that we must acknowledge our limited understanding of the infinite God and in humility say, "I just don't know." However, I believe we need to seek to understand as much as revealed about God. Jesus is the clearest picture we have of God. He is God in the flesh. But remember that when he became human, it only allowed us to see a human view of God. There is so much beyond that we cannot know. When Jesus hung on the cross, he also became one step lower than that. He became sin itself for us. Isaiah says he was marred more than any human. Was that a picture of God too, so ugly? I've mentioned before that in each age God speaks to us in our own language. He comes to us in custom ways that we will understand. He only reveals the part of the picture we can get. Kathy and I were in Nova Scotia a few years ago, taking a bus from Halifax, that great port city. The bus driver told us a story which I think will help illustrate how God might do something that is otherwise repulsive to us and possibly to him too, in order to speak our language, to communicate something to us, to motivate us to action, and finally to save us. The date was December 6, 1917. World War I was underway, and the French ship, the Mont Blanc, was coming into the port at Halifax from New York, ultimately heading to France to supply the Allies. It was carrying 2,600 tons of explosives, including TNT, nitrocellulose, and picric acid, as well as several barrels of high-octane benzol on deck. Normally, a ship with such a cargo would be flying a red flag of warning, but this was wartime, and the crew didn't want to be a target for German submarines, and so it wasn't marked. Now, Halifax has a narrow entry point into the harbor. It's narrow enough that ships have to strictly follow the code of passing to the right of oncoming ships. At the same time as the Mont Blanc was coming into port, the SS Emo was leaving port, going to head south to the United States to pick up grain to take to Belgium, where people were starving. As the Mont Blanc entered the Narrows, the captain discovered that the Emo was in his lane. He sounded his horn in warning. The Emo replied with 2 short blasts indicating it was going to hold its course. The Mont Blanc attempted to pass on the left, but the Emo, in putting its engines in reverse, twisted around and its backside struck the Mont Blanc in a glancing blow that knocked over the barrels of benzol. They, of course, caught fire, and now the captain, knowing they were riding a bomb, told his men to get off board and get to shore, which they did in a lifeboat, while the burning ship floated on into harbor without anybody guiding it. Meanwhile, the people of the surrounding city had noticed what was going on with the 2 ships, and crowds were gathering on the banks to watch the spectacle, especially now that the Mont Blanc was burning. When the sailors of the Mont Blanc got to shore, they yelled at the crowd to evacuate, but nobody did anything. They didn't understand, possibly because the sailors spoke French. To the crowd, these guys looked like madmen. In desperation, one of the sailors saw a mother who was holding a baby, and he grabbed the baby and ran. Now they were no longer just madmen, they were criminals. And the crowd began chasing the kidnappers. He led them up a hill and into a wood to safety. At 9:04 a.m., 19 minutes after the collision, the worst man-made explosion of history, short of a nuclear weapon, occurred in Halifax, destroying the port, leveling much of the city. Windows were broken 100 kilometers away, and nearly 2,000 lives were lost. But some were saved by the heroic, if criminal, act of a sailor. In the moment, the sailor was seriously misunderstood, but he was working to speak their language, to save their lives. Some of God's strange acts in the Old Testament may be of a similar nature to this act by the sailor, only in God's case, the explanation doesn't come so quickly. I believe much is happening behind the visible. God is willing to be misunderstood to bring us to himself. He alone knows the entire story. Are we willing to trust his word? The man working to collect firewood on the Sabbath was breaking the fourth commandment. He received the wages of sin, death. Now remember the text from Exodus 34 that says, "By no means clearing the guilty, but visiting the iniquity of the parents upon the children and children's children to the third and fourth generation." As I've been studying in preparation for this Sabbath, I've begun to realize what may be coming through in this text. Who was the children's child? Remember a few weeks ago when Terry Swenson talked about the genealogy at the beginning of Matthew's Gospel? It begins with Abraham and goes on through David and other people and finally ends up with Jesus. Jesus was the children's child. Jesus received the sins of all of his fathers. Jesus bore their sins and the sins of the world. He's the sacrifice to which all the sacrificial lambs pointed. And so finally, here's one last story. This is how Jesus, in another time, handled a very similar situation to the one when people dragged the man to Moses who had been collecting sticks. To Jesus was brought a person who had been caught breaking not the fourth, but the seventh commandment. Early in the morning, he came again to the temple. All the people came to him, and he sat down and began to teach them. The scribes and Pharisees brought a woman who had been caught in adultery, and making her stand before all of them, they said to him, "Teacher, this woman was caught in the very act of adultery. Now in the law, Moses commanded us to stone such women. Now what do you say?" They said this to test him, so that they might have some charge to bring against him. Jesus bent down and wrote with his finger in the ground. When they kept on questioning him, he straightened up and said to them, "Let anyone among you who is without sin be the first to throw a stone at her." And once again he bent down and wrote on the ground the sins of each of them. When they heard it, they went away, one by one, beginning with the elders, and Jesus was left alone with the woman standing before him. Jesus straightened up and said to her, "Woman, where are they? Has no one condemned you?" She said, "No one, sir." And Jesus said, "Neither do I condemn you. Go your way, and from now on do not sin." Stop and absorb that story for just a moment. If it weren't for Jesus, the children's child, this woman deserved the same treatment as the man picking up sticks. In fact, her accusers deserved the same. We deserved the same. But because of Jesus, we can stand uncondemned and go our way, leaving our lives of sin. But thanks be to God, who in Christ Jesus always leads us in triumphal procession, and through us spreads in every place the fragrance that comes from knowing him. For we are the aroma of Christ to God among those who are being saved. O God, who longs to be one with us, to whom time is meaningless and to whom death is but a small matter, you have demonstrated your love for us in countless ways. The air we breathe, the comfort of friendships, the fragrance of flowers and grape juice, the taste of bread, indeed, the very beating of our hearts remind us daily of your love. We respond to that love, Lord, with longings we cannot express, how we want to be one with you and one with each other. May our lives, Lord, be a triumphal procession, the fragrance of Christ, and may these be the gifts we give to you. May we, O Lord, accept the good given and the difficulties we cannot understand, knowing that you will make good. May we accept your holy authorship of our lives. Amen.